week my dad's will was supposed to be read, my sister-in-law changed the locks on the house I had lived in for 3 years. She didn't tell me. I found out when I came back from the pharmacy with his prescriptions. Prescriptions he no longer needed because he had passed 4 days earlier, and my key didn't turn. I stood on the porch in the November cold, paper bag in my hand, and I just stared at the new deadbolt like it might explain itself. I called my brother. He didn't pick up. I called again. He picked up on the fourth ring and said in a voice so calm it felt rehearsed that he and his wife had decided it was best if I found somewhere else to stay while the estate was being settled. He said the word estate like it was a business term, like we were colleagues wrapping up a project, like our father hadn't died 6 days ago in a bedroom 20 feet from where I was standing. I said his name. He said he had to go. That was November. Let me back up a little. My dad raised my brother and me alone after a mom left when I was 7. He worked construction for 30 years, saved everything he could, bought a house in Barrie, Ontario, and spent the last decade of his life turning it into something he was genuinely proud of. He built the back deck himself. He tiled the kitchen floor on his knees at 61. When his health started going, first his heart, then his lungs, then just everything at once, I moved back home to help. I was 29. I had a decent job doing bookkeeping for a small firm in town, and I could work remotely, so it made sense. My brother, who was 34 and lived 40 minutes away in Innisfil with his wife and their 2 kids, said he appreciated it. He said it a lot. He said it every time I called to update him and every time I didn't call, and he needed to feel absolved of something. I didn't resent doing it. I want to be clear about that. My dad was good to me, my whole life. Sitting with him, driving him to his appointments at the Royal Victoria, making sure he ate something. None of that felt like a burden. It felt like the only thing that made sense. He died on a Tuesday morning in early November. Quietly, in his own bed, the way he'd asked to. By Thursday, my brother's wife had called the locksmith. I found out later she had also called the family lawyer, a man I'll call by his first name, Douglas, on the same day my dad died. Before the funeral. Before we had even told all the relatives. She had called Douglas and asked about the estate timeline and whether probate could be expedited. Douglas told me this himself months later, and the way he said it made clear he had been uncomfortable with the call but had answered her questions anyway. My brother had power of attorney for property. My dad had set that up 2 years earlier when his health first got serious, which made practical sense at the time. My brother handled the banking. He managed the bills. I handled the physical care. It seemed balanced. What I didn't know, what I had no reason to suspect, was that my brother had been using that power of attorney to do things that had nothing to do with my dad's care. I found out about the first transfer by accident. I'd been staying with a friend in town after the lockout, sleeping on her couch, and about 3 weeks after the funeral, I went back to the house to collect more of my things. My brother let me in that time, supervised, like I was a tenant on bad terms, rather than someone who had lived there for 3 years. While he was in the garage, I went to get my laptop from the spare room, and I noticed a stack of papers on the desk in my dad's old office. Not filed, just left there. I'm a bookkeeper. Numbers catch my eye the way a wrong note catches a musician's ear. I saw a figure on the top sheet, $42,000, transferred out of my dad's personal savings account 8 months before he died. I didn't take the papers. I took a photo of the top page with my phone before my brother came back. I didn't say anything. That night I looked at the photo for a long time. $42,000. My dad's savings account, destination listed as a numbered company I didn't recognize. I searched the company number in the Ontario Business Registry. It had been incorporated 18 months earlier. The director listed was my sister-in-law's maiden name. I sat with that for a while. I made a cup of tea I didn't drink. I thought about whether I was misreading something, whether there was a reasonable explanation, whether I was about to become someone who accused their family of something they hadn't done. I couldn't find a reasonable explanation. I called a legal aid clinic the next morning. I didn't have money for a lawyer yet, and spoke to a duty counsel named, I think, Ms. Park. She was patient and precise. And she told me that power of attorney does not authorize the transfer of funds to a third party for personal benefit. She told me that if what I have photographed was accurate, it might constitute financial abuse of a vulnerable adult and potentially fraud. She told me I should document everything I could and contact the Office of the Public Guardian and Trustee. I started documenting. This is the part that took 2 months and that I didn't tell anyone about. I requested records from the bank as a beneficiary of the estate, which I was entitled to do once probate began. I cross-referenced dates. I found 3 transfers totaling just under $90,000, all going to that same numbered company, all made in the 14 months before my dad died. I found receipts in an old email account my dad had given me the password to for his medications, his equipment rentals, his home care supplies, none of which had been reimbursed from the estate account the way they should have been. I had paid for several of those things out of my own pocket. I had not been reimbursed either. I filed a report with the RCMP's Financial Crimes Unit. I filed a complaint with the Law Society of Ontario regarding Douglas, who, it turned out, had drafted the numbered company incorporation on my sister-in-law's behalf, the same lawyer who was now handling my dad's estate. I had not known that. I suspect he was hoping I wouldn't find out. The estate meeting, the formal reading and settlement discussion, was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in late January at Douglas's office on Dunlop Street. My brother would be there. His wife would be there. Douglas would be there. I would be there. I had not told any of them what I had filed. I want to explain why. And it's the thing I think people misunderstand about situations like this. When you're dealing with people who have already demonstrated they're willing to act without your knowledge, confronting them early gives them time to move things, hide things, get their story straight. I had watched my sister-in-law operate for 3 years. She was methodical. She was proactive. She would not be caught off guard easily. So I didn't tell her I knew. I didn't tell my brother. I let them believe I was grieving and disorganized and unlikely to put up a serious fight. The morning of the estate meeting, I drove downtown early. I was wearing my good coat, a charcoal one I bought when I got my bookkeeping certification, and I was running through numbers in my head the way I always do when I'm nervous. I parked on Collier Street and walked toward Dunlop, and that's when I saw him. He was sitting just outside the Tim Hortons near the corner in a wheelchair. Winter coat not quite warm enough for January in Barrie. He had a coffee cup in his hand, and he was watching the street with the particular attentiveness of someone who has nowhere urgent to be. He looked to be in his mid-70s. I almost walked past him. I don't know exactly why I didn't. I stopped and asked if he was all right. He said he was fine, just waiting for his nephew who was 20 minutes late as usual. He said it without bitterness, just fact. I offered to wait with him for a few minutes. He said he wouldn't say no to the company. We talked. He asked what brought me downtown on a Thursday morning, and I gave him the short version. Estate meeting. My dad had passed. Complications. He nodded like he had heard that word complications applied to estates before and knew what it usually meant. He asked what firm. I told him Douglas's name. He got quiet for a moment and then asked, carefully, whether I was represented. I said I had filed some reports but didn't have a lawyer at the table. He looked at me for a moment. Then he asked if he could come. I didn't know what to say to that. He said he had his own reason for being on Dunlop Street that afternoon. He had a 2 o'clock at a firm 2 doors down from Douglas's office. He said if anything went sideways in my meeting, it might be useful to have someone in the waiting room who knew the building. I said, all right. I pushed his wheelchair the 2 blocks to Douglas's office. His name was Walter. He told me he was retired. He didn't tell me from what. My brother and his wife were already in the waiting room when I arrived. My sister-in-law looked at Walter the way people sometimes look at things they consider out of place. Not cruel, just pointed, and made a comment under her breath to my brother that I caught the edge of. Something about me not being able to come to a legal meeting alone. My brother didn't respond. Douglas brought us into the boardroom. Walter stayed in the waiting area. The receptionist brought him a coffee without being asked, which I noticed. The meeting started the way these things do. Douglas going through the way. These things do. Douglas going through the will, the property valuation, the assets. My dad's house was assessed at just under $400,000. There were some registered savings, some personal property. My brother was named executor. I was named co-beneficiary with my brother 50-50 after debts. Then Douglas said he had prepared a proposed settlement that accounted for, in his words, the costs associated with my brother's estate management responsibilities and certain outstanding expenses. He slid a document across the table. The document proposed that I receive approximately $60,000 less than my equal share to compensate my brother for 2 years of estate administration at a rate that worked out to about $300 an hour, and to cover some unspecified household expenses my sister-in-law had apparently calculated. I looked at the document. I looked at Douglas. I looked at my brother, who was looking at the table. I said, I'd like to discuss the transfers first. The room changed. I opened the folder I had brought with me, printed records, bank statements, the incorporation documents for the numbered company, the dates, the amounts, the cross-references, and I put them on the table face up. All $90,000 of it, documented and organized the way a bookkeeper documents things, which is to say precisely. My sister-in-law said that was private financial information. I said it was estate financial information, which as a beneficiary I was entitled to access, which Ms. Mong, Park at the Legal Aid Clinic had confirmed for me in November. My brother said my name. He said it in the voice people use when they want you to stop. I didn't stop. Douglas had gone the color of the wall behind him. I understood, looking at him, that he had not expected me to have any of this. He had drafted the numbered company. His name wasn't on the transfers, but his fingerprints were on the structure, and he knew it. And now I knew it, and there were printed documents on the table in front of 4 people that made all of that extremely legible. My sister-in-law started talking about how she had managed the household, how she had coordinated the care schedule, how there should be compensation for her contributions. I asked her to point to the line item in the power of attorney documentation that authorized transfers to a company she controlled. She said it wasn't that simple. I said, $90,000 in 14 months is actually pretty straightforward to read. My brother put his face in his hands. What happened next I had not entirely planned for, and I want to be honest about that. I had prepared the documents. I had filed the reports. I had not known what would happen inside that room exactly, because I had never sat across a table from my brother while evidence of what he had let happen was spread out between us, and I had not known whether I would be able to hold it together. I held it together. Barely. Douglas asked for a recess. He stepped out. I assumed he was going to consult someone or compose himself or possibly make a call he was not supposed to make. What actually happened was that the receptionist came to the boardroom door and said, in a very neutral voice, that there was a gentleman in the waiting room asking to come in. She said he had mentioned the Law Society. My sister-in-law said, "What?" Walter came through the door in his wheelchair, and the receptionist, without being asked, stood aside. I learned Walter's last name that afternoon. I won't write it here because I haven't asked his permission. What I will tell you is that he had spent 31 years as a bencher with the Law Society of Ontario and had served as treasurer, which is the equivalent of president, for 1 term, and that he was in Douglas's building that afternoon because he had been asked to meet with Douglas's senior partner regarding an unrelated compliance matter. He had not planned to come into our meeting. He came in because the receptionist, who had overheard enough through the door to be concerned, had asked him if he would. He sat down at the table. He looked at the documents. He looked at Douglas. He said with the same casual precision he had used when we were talking outside Tim Hortons that it might be a good idea for everyone to be very thoughtful about the next few minutes. Douglas said something about the documents being contested. Walter said, "They don't look contested to me. I don't want to make this sound like one speech changed everything because that's not quite what happened. What happened is that Walter's presence in that room altered what everyone in it understood to be possible. Douglas knew who Walter was. My brother's wife knew enough to go quiet. My brother, for the first time that afternoon, looked at me directly instead of at the table. The meeting ended without a settlement. My brother's wife tried to leave quickly and found a police officer in the lobby. I had called the RCMP non-emergency line the previous evening to let them know there was an ongoing financial investigation and to ask whether someone could be available near the address at the time of the meeting. They could, as it turned out. That officer had questions. Douglas was referred to the Law Society's complaints process by Walter personally before he left the building. I filed a formal statement 2 days later. The estate was frozen pending investigation. My brother cooperated. Whether out of conscience or calculation, I still don't entirely know, and confirmed that he had signed the transfer authorizations and that his wife had initiated them. He said he hadn't understood what it meant. I have complicated feelings about whether I believe that. 6 months later, my sister-in-law pleaded guilty to fraud over $5,000. She received a conditional sentence and was ordered to make full restitution to the estate. Douglas surrendered his license. My brother did not face criminal charges, which still sits uneasy with me, though the civil process is not finished. I received my full half of the estate. The house in Barrie sold in the spring. I wasn't there for the closing. I didn't need to be. My dad had built that back deck himself and tiled that kitchen floor on his knees at 61. And the fact that someone tried to take what he built and left behind, that I caught it, that I could prove it, that I didn't let it disappear into a proposed settlement slid across a table. That is what I needed. Not the money specifically. the accuracy of it. The record being correct. Walter and I have had coffee 3 times since then. He's exactly as calm in a Tim Hortons as he is in a boardroom, which I find consistently reassuring. His nephew is still usually late. I think about the morning I almost walked past him. The paper bag in my hand outside a locked door in November. The 3 months of printing and cross-referencing and not saying anything. All the small decisions that had to go a particular way. My dad used to say, "Don't rush toward a fight you can win by waiting." I was 31 years old, and I had never understood that as clearly as I did sitting at that boardroom table watching my sister-in-law look at a retired bencher of the Law Society and realize that every assumption she had made about how that afternoon would go had just been quietly, completely wrong. I keep coming back to the version of that morning where I walked past him. It would have been easy to do. It was January in Barrie. I was running numbers in my head, and my heart was doing something I didn't have a name for. Not quite fear, not quite grief, some combination of both that had been sitting in my chest for 3 months. Walter was just a man in a coat that wasn't warm enough, holding a coffee cup outside of Tim Hortons. I almost kept walking. I don't think what happened was fate. I don't think the universe arranged it. I think it was a small decision made in a cold moment that turned out to matter more than I knew at the time. And that's the part I can't stop thinking about. Not the dramatic stuff, not the boardroom, not the look on my sister-in-law's face. Just, I stopped. That's it. I stopped because it seemed like the decent thing to do. My dad raised me to do that. Pay attention to people. Don't walk past someone who looks like they could use a few minutes of company. It wasn't a lesson he ever stated out loud. He just lived it consistently for as long as I knew him. And I think about how he would have found it deeply, quietly funny that the person who ended up helping me correct the record of his own estate was someone I met because I stopped on a sidewalk for 10 minutes. There's something in that about what actually protects us. Not position, not leverage, not getting louder. What protected me in that boardroom was $90,000 of documented transactions that I had cross-referenced over 2 months while I was sleeping on a friend's couch and not telling anyone what I was doing. That took a kind of patience I had to learn. The patience to not act before you can act well. My brother's wife was proactive. She moved fast. She changed locks and called lawyers and initiated transfers and built a structure she assumed I wouldn't understand. What she didn't account for was that I would sit quietly with the documents long enough to understand all of it. That's the thing I'd want to pass on to anyone who's been in a version of that situation. The intelligence you need isn't always obvious. It's not just legal knowledge or financial literacy, though those helped. It's the willingness to learn what you don't know yet, to ask the duty counsel at the legal aid clinic a careful question, and actually listen to the answer, to look at a number on a page and follow it somewhere instead of looking away, because it's uncomfortable. And underneath all of that, underneath the patience and the documentation and the careful timing, there has to be something that holds. Some sense of what you actually owe the person you're fighting for. My dad built that house himself. He tiled the kitchen floor at 61. He worked construction for 30 years, so there would be something left behind. The reason I didn't walk away from that proposed settlement, the reason I printed every statement and filed every report and sat in that boardroom without flinching, is that I knew what it had cost him to build what he built. Letting it disappear quietly wasn't something I was capable of. Not because I was brave, because I knew the weight of it. Walter still takes his coffee black. His nephew is still late. Some things don't change, and I find that reassuring too.